Are Bible scholars attacking your faith? I want to offer a little bit of a personal reflection in this video. I've been a youth pastor. I was a youth pastor for almost 10 years, and I trained as a Bible scholar, and all that training all combined took me about 15 years. And it's funny because as I reflect on those two roles I've held, one as a church leader, one as a Bible scholar, in one, as a pastor, I routinely lied to people. And it wasn't intentional. Like looking back on it, I wasn't trying to lie. I just didn't know. I just didn't know any better. And I've had some people say things in my comments along the lines of like, why are you so critical of Christianity? Why are you attacking Christianity? And these go right down to the whole, like they swing the gamut from people trying to be gentle and just like trying to gently like ask nicely to people like saying like, what's wrong with you basically? Why are Bible scholars out to destroy Christianity? And I've done some reflecting on this, and I really like, this is genuinely a personal, it's generally a personal struggle because like, I'm not out to destroy people's faith. When I'm making YouTube videos, I have no interest in destroying people's faith, but there are many of us who, for other reasons, have had our faith destroyed. And in many cases, it's not the Bible scholar's fault. So that's what I want to talk about in this video. I did this video on the Son of God, and I talked about how every single Roman coin had the words Dei Filius on it. This meant a son of a god or son of the divine, and it was a common way. Often Caesars, often Roman Caesars, Roman emperors were referred to with this language. So early Christian writers, when they drew upon some of this Son of God imagery, they were very clearly echoing things that were happening in the imperial cult. Now, a lot of people didn't know this, which is great. I love doing something like teaching something new. And honestly, as I was doing the research for it, I discovered things too. But it's funny because people see that as an attack on Christianity. Like I'm just out to destroy Christianity by pointing out that there was something in the ancient world that looks a little bit like this religion. Now, as I see it, you have two possibilities when you hear new information about antiquity. First of all, you can see it as an attack on Christianity. Or secondly, you can see it as a fact that helps us read Christianity and helps us wrestle with that. I didn't make up the emperor cult. I didn't make up the fact that it was there. Christians knew that, and they still decided to join a religion, but they also still decided to include it in their texts. So why? To me, this is just endlessly fascinating. But what's equally fascinating is why people get so triggered by it. Now, I understand to some extent because I did too. Like when I started studying biblical scholarship, it was in a way triggering for me too. And I, in some ways, thought like I'm out to destroy people like Bart Ehrman. And like, ironically now, I think there's very little I don't agree with Bart Ehrman on. Like he's an excellent scholar. But one of the things I think I brought to this, and I think we often do, as we come to learn about biblical scholarship, is we assume that Christianity has to be true in the way that we're taught to believe it. We assume the gospel writers were legitimately trying to write accurate history. We read for eyewitness legitimacy in the gospels. Every miracle has to have happened exactly as it's written for the Bible to be true or trustworthy. There can be no contradictions. Like any contradiction can be explained away. Christianity has to be this absolutely unique thing with absolutely no parallels. And then we turn around and discover that the emperor was also called the Son of God, or that there were also other stories of gods who died and rose again, or that Matthew copied Mark, Luke copied Mark. And what happens with that? There are people who look at that and they say, you're trying to destroy us. Bible scholars are often really unfairly associated with Satan. And this is ironic because the vast majority of Bible scholars are actually inside of the Christian tradition. What is happening with this? The thing is, you're mad at the wrong people. You're mad at Bible scholars for showing you the evidence. We get mad at Bible scholars for just doing their jobs. We get mad at historians for pointing out historical facts or for asking hard questions about mythology. Like, really, did all Christians always believe the same things all the time, and anybody who thought differently was an outlier who was directed by Satan? That doesn't make sense for any religious movement or any historical process, much less for like 2,000 years of Christian history. So who actually hurt you in this story? Is it the Bible scholar, or is it the person who gave you a Christianity that was so fragile that anything that contradicts it or questions it feels like a personal attack? And let me say, as somebody who has been on both sides of this, as somebody who was indeed a youth pastor, meaning well, like really meaning well, but as a 20-year-old youth pastor passing on the things that were passed on to me without any critical thinking, just repeating them, That's the person who's at fault. Not always intentionally, very rarely intentionally, but that's what's at fault. It's that we've constructed a golden calf out of our Christianity. Our religion itself has become a golden calf. Now, to some extent, I think every single human being does this. Every single human religious tradition does this because we inherit religions that are shaped by culture and history. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that. That's totally normal. But when you see your specific manifestation of faith as unimpeachable, unquestionable, always right, you don't have a faith. You have a golden calf. When you cultivate 2,000 years of Christian history and assume that all of the ideas that you believe that came out of 2,000 years of history, doctrine, disputes would have made sense to the early Christians, that's not a rational belief. That's a golden calf. And when we take these modern views of the Bible, that the Bible itself has to be inerrant, everything has to tie together, we can just erase the authors and believe God's writing directly to us 2,000 years later, we erase those people who wrote it. We erase the things that they wrestled with. And that, too, is a golden calf. Somebody taught you that the Bible has to be inerrant or else Christianity just falls apart. Somebody taught you that if there's one contradiction in the Bible, the whole thing's a lie. Somebody taught you that if the early Christians believed things that were similar to any other religion in antiquity, then it must all be crap. And somebody taught you that if scholars discover textual variants, your faith is therefore being put under attack. Now, that's not the Bible's fault. That's not scholarship's fault. That's the church's fault. And I don't even want to blame like individual pastors because pastors are just doing their thing. But ultimately, the church that raised me built me a house of cards and told me that it was a fortress. And it was propped up by things I assumed, questions I never asked, silly little things I repeated to make myself feel better, things I learned from apologists that I repeated to make myself feel better. And none of that was an informed faith. It was just a house of cards. And it's ironic now as I reflect on this because it wouldn't have been difficult for somebody to say to me, like, the Bible has contradictions. Here's how we think about that as people of faith. That would have been totally doable. Somebody could have said, Matthew copied 90% of Mark. Here's how we think about this as scripture and the development of scripture. Somebody could have done that. It wouldn't have destroyed my faith if I had been primed to think that. But suddenly I got to seminary and learned this thing, and it was an absolute shock to my system, and it really didn't have to be. If somebody told me Romans used the Son of God to refer to Caesar, and here's why early Christians subverted that language with their texts and their practice, it would have been fine. I could have learned that in the church, and I didn't. I learned it in seminary. A lot of people now are learning it on YouTube, and it feels like, to some people, it feels like an attack on your faith to learn very simple facts. The problem isn't with the facts. The problem is with the way you have been told the faith needs to be, and that when anything challenges that, you therefore think that thing is a threat to you. But I am not attacking faith. Bible scholars are not attacking faith. In many cases, Bible scholars are more conservative than me. I'm a little bit shocking. I mean, I do this on the internet. I find things that fascinate me and I have to talk about it because it's so fun. There are a lot of conservative Bible scholars who have been ostracized by institutions for teaching simple little things that are super obvious in the history that pastors don't tell their congregation, that congregations don't want to hear about. They'll fire their pastors for telling them about this kind of stuff. And that's what's really ironic. It's this. Your church leaders knew this stuff. A lot of your church leaders, this isn't true in the church I grew up with, that nobody was educated in any way about the Bible, but a lot of church leaders go to seminary. Church leaders learn about textual criticism. They learn, in some cases, some Greek and Hebrew. They learn about the history of doctrine and where things come from. And then they often go back to their churches and we have an environment where they can't talk about what they learned. In part, it's maybe because the pastors want to get a job, don't want to shock people. In part, it's honestly just probably because the pastors are scared. They're scared that people will leave. They're scared that it will be a challenge to people's faith. They're scared in some cases of their deacons board or elders board. They're scared that people would fire them because in a lot of churches, congregations do have very serious power over their pastors. So if pastors say things that people don't like, they risk getting fired. And those same pastors and church leaders are probably also a little bit scared of admitting they don't have all the answers. And what we have, what I was raised in, is a faith that instead of teaching you that Christianity can survive contact with evidence and actually enjoy this, that doing biblical scholarship, and a lot of people there are secular biblical scholars, but also a lot of people do it within faith traditions, and it's meaningful and exciting, and you learn more, and it enriches your knowledge of this. But now here we are, there are so many modern Christians encountering evidence and they think that the evidence is the problem. They think that the Bible scholar is the problem instead of the system that gave you a golden calf. The evidence was always there. The emperor cult always existed. The textual variants existed. The other Christian writings existed. The history of canonization existed. The other doctrines that didn't get picked up by the church existed. The problem is your church just hoped that you would never find out about them. And that's not me betraying you. That's not the Bible scholar betraying you. That's the church betraying you. We as a church, and I'm putting this on me because I taught kids for 10 years. We as a church, I as a youth pastor was guilty of this, of giving my kids a fragile, ego-driven faith, evidence-centric faith that wouldn't actually hold up to scrutiny, just as mine didn't hold up to scrutiny. I read apologetic arguments and spouted them off to teenagers, hoping that that was what would give them a real faith or a real walk with God. And ironically, when my own faith came into contact with real evidence in a way that I couldn't just put my fingers in my ears, it was destroyed for a little while. The funny thing is, as I reflect on this now, the fact that my faith was so fragile that historical facts tore it apart, what was I actually trusting? And it's ironic too, as you think about this, because early Christians knew a lot of this stuff. A lot of this stuff that's shocking to me is just because of our historical processes of forgetting and myth-making. We create mythology around how things happen and then realize that mythology isn't true, and then it hurts our modern faith to do it. But early Christians believed something. They still thought this was worth believing. And in many cases, yes, that they thought it was worth dying for in many cases. That is really interesting, even though they didn't hold a lot of the same beliefs that you do. So when we do biblical scholarship, and this is true for quote unquote liberal Bible scholars, quote unquote conservative Bible scholars, secular Bible scholars, anybody in between, when we do biblical scholarship, what if instead of letting that fundamentalist spirit eat our religion, what if we tore down the golden calf instead? Christianity survived for centuries without core doctrines. Christianity survived for centuries without a canon of scripture and reading a lot of different texts that we don't read anymore. Christians survived for centuries without even believing the Trinity. Christians definitely went for centuries without believing in substitutionary atonement, or definitely went for centuries without believing in modern views like inerrancy or complementarianism or any of these things that were made up in the 20th century. Like, this is not historical Christianity. So having it challenged isn't a challenge to historical Christianity. It's a challenge to our fabrication of historical Christianity. It's a challenge to our myth-making. And some of that myth-making deserves to be challenged. The thing I do find is that this ancient faith has a lot of richness to it. And I still really enjoy practicing this faith. And the fact that I've torn down this golden calf, it was hard for a while, but I did eventually rebuild a faith. And I think my faith is richer now than I could ever imagine. It's a lot more humble. It's a lot more, especially I say like epistemological humility is something that is now the defining marker of whatever faith I do practice, but it's still a faith and it's still rich and it's still informed by history in a way that it never was before. So if you're going to be angry, don't get angry at Bible scholars. Get angry at the right people. Don't be angry at me for showing you evidence. Don't be angry at Bible scholars for doing their jobs. Don't be angry at the Bible for being a historical text or a collection of historical texts written in a different context than we actually really understand. Be angry at the system that helped you create this Christianity that was so fragile, that golden calf that needed apologists to prop it up, and that needed lies and oversimplifications and needed an absence of real questions to prop it up, because that was never real faith. Even though I have a lot of critiques for evangelicalism, which is where I was raised, this is not even an attempt to attack that historic phenomenon because it was a product of its time. It was imperfect. But let's tear it down and build something better. And great biblical scholarship can be a part of that. It doesn't have to destroy the church. Great biblical scholarship should inform us and should make our Christianity richer. And that's what gets me really excited about doing it. Frankly, I'm still a practicing Christian who loves biblical scholarship. A lot of biblical scholars are, not all, certainly. But having a historically informed, epistemologically humble faith doesn't hurt us. It only helps us. And if it hurts when that other type of faith gets torn down, maybe it's for the best. Maybe something beautiful can be built in its place. And I certainly hope that's the case for most of you. And if you're angry in my comments, yelling at me about biblical scholarship, you're angry at the wrong person. So thank you very much. Hope that was interesting. I'll see you next time.